we're back. Everybody have a seat, please.
Well, thank you for having me. I don't really get out of Brooklyn where I reside very much anymore. I'm very much homebound. So Yonkers is alien territory to me. It's foreign. It's a foreign land. But there are just a couple of exceptions. I get to see my old friend, the Gaulle, Adelaide, who I suspect many of you know. Maybe you should stand up so others will know. Now, you asked me how I met the Gaulle, I haven't a clue.
I'll tell a story later.
A long time ago, that much I'm sure of. Though I can't really distinguish at this point between a long time ago and an hour ago. And always it's a special pleasure to see the Gaull's children grow up. And they are so smart and so well behaved and have so much promise that it's genuinely invigorating to meet them. One of them came down with COVID, so she's not here today, but there is Nor. So Nor's going to stand up. Being something of an old-fashioned person, I immediately drilled her about her education. And I was most concerned with the declining quality of our public schools, what she was reading in school. I was half satisfied. And then I asked her how much homework she gets a night, and she said 4 hours. And I was satisfied with that. That is a reasonable amount. And then I spoke to her younger brother, Nasser, who's going to stand up. I asked him what was his best subject, and he said English. And I asked the second, and he said math. And I asked him, how are you doing in math? And he said 98 or 99. That's what I expected to hear. But then he told me that his science class doesn't meet very often because the teachers have a conference in the first period during the day. And I was not happy to hear that. And I wondered why the Gaulle had not registered a complaint. That's not acceptable, in my view. But otherwise, I was very happy with what I heard. And at the risk of sounding morbid and also sounding dramatic, which I try not to do, rather the facts speak for themselves, I couldn't help but think that there are 10,000 children like Noor and Nasser who are dead now. And I couldn't help but think that the Save the Children organization stated 2 days ago that 10 children each day in Gaza suffer from either a single or double amputation of their legs every day. 10 children suffer a single or double amputation of their legs each day. And if you ask yourself a simple question, how many children have you actually seen in your entire life who have had to undergo a single or a double amputation? I think most of you would say 0, and some of you might say 1. Whereas in Gaza now, it's become a daily routine. And without worrying horrifying enough, it was reported yesterday that there have been 1,000 amputations in Gaza with no anesthetics. 1,000 amputations with no anesthetics. And when you think about those things, those facts of daily life, the international humanitarian organizations have these categories, very rigid, narrow categories, to describe the various states of nourishment in various conflict zones in the world. And it goes from hunger to starvation to the ultimate category, the category of famine. And right now, Gaza hovers mostly in the starvation category and heading towards famine. In fact, Gaza, as you all know, is a very tiny place. It's about 2.3 million people. Its length is shorter than a marathon. It's about 25 miles. So for those of you who have run the marathon, its full length is shorter than a marathon, and its full width is just 5 miles. So those of you who know Manhattan, the full width of Gaza goes from NYU at West 4th Street to Columbia University on 116th Street. That's all of Gaza. The population of Gaza is not insubstantial, but it's also not substantial. It's about 2.3 million people, smaller, if I'm not mistaken, than the population of Brooklyn, New York, one of the 5 boroughs where I happen to reside. And yet, when you take the full scope of our globe, roughly 7 or 8 billion people, I'm checking with the globe if I got that right. It is between 7 and 8 billion people. Actually, I should have checked with Nor. 80%, hard to believe. I mean, all the numbers are very difficult to comprehend. 80% of the world's hungriest people, the whole planet, China, India, the whole of Africa, the whole of the Middle East, the whole planet, 80% of the hungriest people in the world today, as I speak, are in Gaza. 2.3 million people, 80% of the hungriest people in the world today are in Gaza. And yet, we have this scene before us this past week of South Africa, to its eternal credit, South Africa having to make the case, having to argue the point that what's going on in Gaza is a genocide. Everything I just described, every single word is man-made. We are not talking about natural disasters. We are not talking about underdevelopment. Not at all. What we're talking about, every amputation without anesthetics, that is calculated. Let there be no mistake about it. Israel could allow the anesthetics into Gaza. It prohibits it. That's calculated. Every starving child and adult in Gaza, that is not a natural disaster. It's not resulting from a famine caused by crop failure. Every starving child and adult, that is a calculated, predictable, and predicted man-made horror. On October 8th, Israel announced no food, no water, no electricity, no fuel will be allowed in Gaza. Now you ask yourselves a simple question. Is it complicated? Does it require a hearing or a proceeding at the International Court of Justice? Does it require great cogitation, meditation, consideration to figure out that if you don't allow food, water, electricity, and fuel to a civilian population, you're going to create a genocide? Is that complicated? Does it need to be required for the South African delegation to make a presentation? All you have to do is read the statements, which were then acted upon by government officials and soldiers, just put it together, a very uncomplicated, in my view, call me simple-minded, but I should think that if you don't allow me to eat or drink water for more than a week, I think I'm going to die. That's not very complicated. What was most revolting, what was most nauseating about the ICJ hearings, the International Court of Justice hearings, is to watch the way the chief counsel for Israel, Malcolm Shaw, conducted himself. He was so proud, so haughty, so contemptuous of the South African delegation, how he talked down to the great John Dugard, who led the defense of the South African team. And I'm thinking to myself, why is Mr. Shaw Why is Mr. Malcolm Shaw, with his arrogant British English, who thinks it's still the days of the British Empire, and he gets to talk down and kick in the teeth the natives, why is he so proud? What are you doing, Mr. Shaw, that you're so proud of yourself? What are you doing? Most times, what do lawyers do? Most times, lawyers or defense lawyers are defending a criminal who has already committed the crime. And we're at, so to speak, the punishment stage. The crime is over. But in the case of Malcolm Shaw, the crime is in process. So what is he doing? He is working overtime to enable Israel to complete the genocide of the people of Gaza. And he's so proud of that he'll get to kill, murder, and force the amputation of more Noors, more Nassers. It's a sight to behold what's happening before our eyes. Now, I want to just go through several points because I want to give you a chance to speak and hear your concerns and your areas of inquiry. So I'm going to try to do, I guess, 3 or 4 things. I'm going to ask Nicole to signal me when I have, let's call it 5 minutes, okay? Because I don't want to monopolize the time, and I do want to give the people who came here a chance to speak. I'll go through 4 points, roughly, until Nicole takes the host and moves me off stage. Number 1, October 7th, as everybody knows, October 7th wasn't the beginning. October 7th was the climax. It was the culmination of the martyrdom of the people of Gaza. Now, the martyrdom begins in 1948, when Israel ethnically cleansed, expelled the population from the area that became the State of Israel. Roughly 300,000 of those Palestinians who were expelled ended up in Gaza. And it's important to bear in mind that whenever you hear about Gaza, 70% of the population of Gaza today consists of about, 70% are refugees from 1948 or descendants of refugees. Half the population of Gaza are children. So, that's the beginning of the story. The roughly 300,000 people of Gaza, people from what became the State of Israel, who ended up in Gaza. Along the way, before we get up to the present, there were periodic massacres visited on the people of Gaza. In 1955, 56, in that period, it was called the Israeli-British-French invasion of Egypt. Gaza was at that point under the control of Egypt. The Israelis went into Gaza, and the estimates are they killed between 400 and 500 people in Gaza, lined them up, shot them down. There were a whole number of other massacres that occurred before that event, and occurred after that event. As a consequence, Gaza was always a thorn at the side of Israel. They simply would not acquiesce, they simply would not accept the fate that had been meted out to them. Actually, the first Intifada, the first civil revolt among the Palestinians in the occupied territories, it began in 1987, December 7th, 1987. It began in Jabalia camp in Gaza. Beginning in 1990, Israel resolved on a strategy to contain Gaza. As I said, it was always a problem for them. They just didn't know what to do with that tiny parcel of land. And beginning around 1990, they created a policy of what was called closure, which was effectively to limit the amount of, limit the area in which Gazans could freely conduct their lives, and also to systematically destroy their economy. Already by 2004, the head of Israel's National Security Council, the equivalent of our CIA, his name is Giora Eiland. Already in 2004, Giora Eiland described Gaza as, quote, a huge concentration camp. And Giora Eiland is a right-wing lunatic, but he was honest, candid in his assessment of what Gaza looked like. Beginning in 2006, the people of Gaza were instructed by the U.S. government to carry out an election. And in January 2006, they carried out the election in the West Bank and Gaza, and surprisingly, the Hamas movement won. I don't want to get into the details. That was a free choice of the people in the West Bank and Gaza. Our own former president, Jimmy Carter, monitored the elections. He called the elections free and fair. Hamas won. As far as one can tell, people voted less because of Hamas's ideology and more because Hamas had a record for honesty in the way it presided over the various charitable organizations in Gaza. They had a record for honesty and a record for not being corrupt. The two obviously go together. And so they won the election. Remember, this was the election they were told to carry out. Hamas was exhorted, urged to participate. What happened? Immediately as the election results came in, the United States, Israel, and the European Union imposed a brutal blockade of Gaza. That was their reward for doing as they were told, to carry out an election. What did the blockade mean? The blockade meant Israel decides what goes in, Israel decides what goes out. Israel controlled the airspace, Israel controlled the territorial waters. Israel controlled the population registry in Gaza, meaning who is and who isn't a legitimate inhabitant of Gaza. Now, what we're told is, in 2005, the occupation of Gaza ended. In 2005, the occupation ended. Did it end? Well, you use your own imaginations. Imagine if there's a prison, and the prisoners are in their cells. And one day, the guards and the warden decide, you know what? We don't need to be inside this prison. Who wants to be among all these prisoners? So they decide, you know what we'll do? We'll take the keys to the cells and we'll throw them to the prisoners. And then we'll just withdraw from the prison. We'll slam shut the prison gates, and then we'll encircle the prison. We'll decide what goes in, what goes out, and let the prisoners do what they want. We don't care. And that's what happened in Gaza. There wasn't an end to the occupation. There was a redeployment of the Israeli troops. From inside Gaza, they encircled Gaza. And then they proceeded to teach these people of Gaza a lesson. Now, some of the things I will tell you, you will find completely unbelievable, because they're like out of a science fiction movie. Israel developed this huge list of things which it wouldn't admit into Gaza. It included no chocolate. We're not letting any chocolate into Gaza, because bonbons are lethal weapons. We're not going to allow any potato chips into Gaza. We won't allow any baby chicks into Gaza. And then they decided, you know what we're going to do? We're going to calculate how many calories each Gazan needs to be just above starvation. What Israel called the humanitarian minimum, or what we can call the starvation plus diet. And they imposed on Gaza a starvation plus diet. And then the economy collapsed because Israel wouldn't let anything in and wouldn't let anything out. And at a certain point, 80% of the population of Gaza was on government or international agency handouts. 60% of the young people in Gaza, 60% were unemployed. And you then have to ask yourself a question. And it was a question I had to pose to myself, to be perfectly candid. By October 7th, it looked as if the young people in Gaza who had no past and no present, they were born into a concentration camp. Gior Island named that, described Gaza that way in 2004. We're now 2023. Most of the young people who burst the gates of Gaza on October 7th, most of them had been born into a concentration camp. And it looked as if this would be their fate until their death. Because at that point, as everybody in the room will remember, It was the era, up until October 7th, it was the era of normalization. The Abraham Accords, and then it looked as if Saudi Arabia was the next country on the queue to sign an agreement with Israel and the United States, and everything was being done above the heads of the Palestinians in general, but of the people in Gaza in particular. And the people of Gaza, their fate was to languish and die in a concentration camp. That's not exaggerated language. I know some people think I'm exaggerating. Some people think, why is he using the term concentration camp? Well, I'm using it because Yonker Island used it. I'm using it because Samira Haas, who is the most knowledgeable person in Israel on the situation in Gaza, because she used it. She said Gaza is a huge concentration camp. I'm using it because as one of my speakers before me, he called it Baruch Kimmerling, a senior sociologist at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, because he said Gaza is the biggest concentration camp ever to exist. And now you have to ask yourself, as a human being, you have to ask yourself a simple question. And I'm not going to answer it for you. I'm simply asking you to pose the question yourself in your minds. The question is, your fate has been sealed. You've tried everything. If you look at Hamas's record, it was moving towards a recognition of the state of Israel, and let's just end the conflict on the June 1967 border. There are many statements by Hamas trying to settle the conflict according to international law. Every attempt by Hamas to settle the conflict was rejected by Israel and rejected by the United States. They next attempted to non-violently protest what was being done to them. And I have been in touch with people there, and I was encouraging that tactic. I thought it could work. And that one began in March 2018, March 30th, 2018. It was called the March of Return, the Great March of Return. What happened? Go look at the record, which nobody wants to look at. They want to start with March, they want to start with October 7th. Go look at the record. The record shows, and now I'm quoting from the major human rights organization investigation. The record showed the marches were overwhelmingly nonviolent. Overwhelmingly nonviolent. What did Israel do? It targeted, I'm quoting from the Human Rights Report, it targeted children for death. The snipers along the border in Gaza, the Israeli snipers, their most expert sharpshooters, they targeted children for death. They targeted medics for death. They targeted journalists for death. And they targeted, I know, hard to believe, they targeted people with disabilities for death, people in wheelchairs and on crutches. That's the experiment with nonviolent civil disobedience. And then you ask yourself a question. They tried to settle it diplomatically. They tried to settle it through nonviolent civil resistance. What were they supposed to do? What were they supposed to do? I don't have an answer to that question. And that's why, since October 7th, every time I appear in a program and I'm asked the first question, do you condemn what Hamas did on October 7th? I have to answer honestly. What happened, I think the record is clear on some aspects. Atrocities occurred on October 7th. The record, in my opinion, so far, the record is clear, atrocities occurred. Were there beheadings of children? No. I don't think the record supports that. Were there rapes, systematic, methodical rapes on October 7th? No. I do not believe, based on the evidence that I've seen so far, that that's true. But having said that, I do acknowledge, because in my opinion, we have to always scrupulously look at the facts, and we have to be faithful to truth, and we have to be faithful to justice. And we should never deviate 1,000th part of 1 inch. So I am not going to deny that atrocities occur. The record seems clear on that, exactly who conducted them, and were they part of the operational orders of Hamas? I don't know. I think that's still a gray area. But I would say atrocities occurred. And then I'm asked, well, do you condemn Hamas? And that's where I have to pause. Because I will not deny that atrocities occurred. However, it is very difficult for me to pass judgment on young people in the flower of their youth, because I had a beautiful childhood. And I remember those days in college when we were filled with such hope. And we had such soaring aspirations. And it was such a beautiful time. I grew up in the 1960s. And to think, what kind of future do these people have? No hope. No aspirations. No nothing. Am I going to condemn them? I won't approve. I won't disapprove. I won't praise. And I won't condemn. Because my entire life I've lived by the precept, there but for the grace of God go I. And I cannot predict with any certitude what I would have done on October 7th. I cannot predict that. I'll just end with one thought, and that is, you can say to me, everything you say is true. I can get it. But why the atrocities? And I'll just give two answers. Number one, as I said, whenever I look at a situation, before I render judgment, I have to look at the options. What choices did they have? So let's say they broke out and they ran for it, as the expression has it. That's already happened. Some of you remember about 2 years ago, there's a high-security Israeli prison called Gilboa in the West Bank. And these three soldiers, like out of a movie, they managed to dig their way out. And when the word came out that the soldiers had escaped, everybody among Palestinians was euphoric. It was hope. That somehow, if they managed to get out of a high-security prison, then maybe we too can one day get out. What happened? Within 1 week, they were all tracked down and they were back in prison after spending years trying to tunnel out. So, if the folks in Gaza, when they broke through the prison gates, if they ran, they would have simply been caught and been right back in the concentration camp. Is that an option? Not really. How about following the verses in Down by the Riverside? If they lay down all their swords and shields. You know the song? Down by the riverside. When they lay down our swords and shields. Down by the riverside. Well, you don't want to lay down their swords and shields. They would be shot. What were they supposed to do? I just don't have an answer to that question. And until somebody gives me an answer to that question, I'm not going to condemn them. I'm not going to approve it, but I'm not going to condemn them either. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our incredible panelists. I'm just going to introduce two more people. One is Representative Jamaal Bowman is here. Thank you so much. Legislative high hopes, and we welcome him. He's going to make a few remarks, and just to say that he is the only member of the legislative body in this community that has consistently and vehemently called for a ceasefire. So we welcome him along. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for allowing me to say a few words. Thank you so much to all of the organizers for putting this event together this evening. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, I've only been in office for a few years, and as you know, I'm the first person of color in U.S. history to represent this congressional district. And the person before me was probably the #1 pro-Israel hawk in the U.S. House of Representatives. And he was chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And he was there for 31 years. And what has been so devastating about his tenure, and what is so devastating right now in terms of what's happening in our U.S. government, no one is telling the truth. So the fact that you all have put together this incredible panel to tell us the truth about what has been happening there for 75 years is incredibly important for this community. We have fed ourselves a myth and a lie and propaganda as facts and truth and knowledge. And as a result of that, people are consistently dying and being slaughtered and killed, mostly women and children. We have told ourselves in this country the myth of American exceptionalism, which excuses us from our moral responsibility, not just in Gaza and Palestine, but right here in the U.S. The reason why we continue to incarcerate black and brown people at the highest rates in the world is because of the lie of American exceptionalism that's rooted in racism and bigotry and discrimination. And it's that lie, it's that myth that allows us to ignore and look the other way while being complicit in the mass murder and mass starvation of the people of Gaza. It's allowed us to look the other way when Benjamin Netanyahu invoked Amalek right after the attacks, referred to the people of Gaza as human animals, acted as if it was okay to cut off food and water and electricity. And a humanitarian crisis exists right now of 2 million people. And we know how many tens of thousands have been killed in this short period of time. Over double the amount of people that have been killed in the Ukraine over a year's period of time. So we have to root ourselves, continue to root ourselves in this sort of truth-telling. But we also have to hold the elected officials accountable of this community who are not saying anything. Because if you are not calling for a ceasefire, you are complicit. You are complicit in the mass murder of women and children. If you are looking the other way, you are complicit. And let me remind everyone of this. It is our tax dollars that is being sent over there to kill women and children. Our tax dollars. It is our weapons, U.S. weapons, that are being used to kill women and children.
That's right.
And it's blown my mind because the atrocities are right in front of our faces. In 2021, I went to Palestine. I went to Ramallah. I went to Hebron. I visited a middle school. I spoke to the children. I asked the children what they wanted. And we know what their answer is. They want freedom. They want the occupation to end. It's right in front of our faces. And my colleagues in Congress, most of them, are not saying anything about this. And they're not saying anything about it because there are some powerful lobbies that bully, that intimidate, and use scare tactics. And they'll call you anti-Semitic whenever you offer a criticism. I'll say again what I always say. I don't want Jewish children to be killed, and I don't want Muslim and Palestinian children to be killed. What's wrong with that? I don't want Jewish women to be killed. I don't want anyone to be killed because they're Jewish. This is not anti-Semitism. This is a critique of a government that has been committing harm for decades. I cannot imagine what it's like to live in a place where I cannot leave, where I cannot move from one part of the street to the other without going through a checkpoint. And if I don't have the proper paperwork, I can't go anywhere. I can't even imagine what that's like. I experienced it for 7 days when I was there and I felt suffocated. And I'm a sitting member of the U.S. House of Representatives. You criticize the government, you're anti-Semitic. You mention the occupation, you're anti-Semitic. You mention apartheid, you're anti-Semitic. You call for a ceasefire, you're anti-Semitic. It's a tool used for them to maintain power because they're trying to stop the conversation and stop the debate. Because once we get into the debate and the nuance of the facts of what's happened over several decades, the truth will come out. And when everyone knows the truth, they will begin to lose their power. And thank God in this moment, the truth is out. The world is watching it every single day. And there are mass protests all over the world as a result of the truth being out. And the majority of those protests are fighting for the lives of the Palestinian people. So it is up to us. It is up to us to do everything in our power to make sure you hold me and my colleagues accountable to continue our fight for justice and equality and human rights of all people. And if we're not doing that, you have to vote us out of office. So once again, thank you to the organizers, thank you to our scholars for being here and coming to Yonkers and delivering the truth to us. I'm also a bit starstruck because I watch them all the time on YouTube. So you have given me the knowledge on YouTube even before coming here. And there are so many other people out there giving us the truth. But I beg everyone in the audience, it cannot stop here. We cannot only come to listen to the truth and then go home and not take action. There is a mayor, there are city council people, there's a county executive, there are county legislators, there are state reps, there's governors, there's mayors all over the place. Put pressure on them and force them to speak up. I'm going to steal a line, and I'll close with this, from my colleague, Representative Al Green. If you want to condemn October 7th, which I have done, a disagreement, it's like disagreement, but I did that. You want to condemn that? Yes. But you can't condemn October 7th and then condone what's happening in Gaza right now. You can't do one and not do the other. And you can't condone what was happening in the West Bank before October 7th. And you can't condone what was happening in Gaza before October 7th. So we have to hold people accountable to tell the truth. And we have to organize to continue to bring the truth to this community, organize politically, and vote the right people into office and vote the others into oblivion. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Representative Bowman. May your righteous rage echo and reverberate in the halls of power. Really. I want to invite a wonderful poet to contribute a piece tonight. Kostmeyer is an American writer, poet, screenwriter, playwright, novelist, whose novel Fargo Burns is available in Arabic and English, and whose poetry has been translated into Arabic as well. He's going to read a piece tonight, and I'm so delighted to have him because he's also my beloved Baba.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for the organizers, thank you to God, and for all the people who make this happen. Well, we're here for because of Palestine. So it raises the question, who are these people? Who are these Palestinians? Why are we all here? A couple of weeks ago, the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, the Jewish deputy mayor of Jerusalem, had his answer. His answer was, they are like ants. They're subhuman. They're less than human. And all of them, according to him, deserve to die. Men, women, children, babies. He said he wanted to get bulldozers so he could shovel them into graves faster. This This kind of language incinerates the mind. When we heard it at home, my wife, daughter Sam and I, we wept. And it makes you so angry. And I want to thank our panel and the representatives and all of you, because we reject that answer. And I'd like to offer a different answer, and this poem is called Palestine. From where I stand, I see the hills of Palestine burning red against the night. From where I live, I see the Holy Land defiled among the ruins of decency, ravaged by the beast of greed. I see the people of an ancient tongue, tribes of gifted lineage, blessed with dignity and grace, forced to flee beyond the reach of human prayer, driven down the burning roads, or left to die beneath the warped and bleeding rubble of our deeds. From where I live, I hear the voice of sorrow walking in the freezing rain, weeping where the olives die, eyeless in the burning wind that forages for missing bodies, dying children, all the dead lie below the wasted wreckage of our crimes. There is a voice that calls to us out of the music and the books, out of the beauty and the wild, out of the ancient legends and the lore. It speaks to us with gentleness, and we are lost and gone if we refuse to hear its cry. Tonight the sky is filled with lethal drones above the hills of Palestine, where armaments of deicide are primed and thirsty for the death of those who know that every breath they take may be their last. We are the children of the end. We manufacture suicide and call it BNP. We are the foolish drifters trapped inside the ride that dies beside the road, now littered with the shattered limbs of children far too young to run, and sages stripped of dignity. If you believe in any kind of prayer, you know there is a better way inside the voice that calls to us. It sounds the beauty of the dark, a welcome stillness in the wind, a silent rhythm in the song, a hymn to everything we love, a sweetness even in the blight, a grievous wisdom in the right to know that shame is just another word for history. It is the voice of human grace that reckons with our righteousness, that burns beyond the reach of heat, that howls against the needless stench, our failing sense of tenderness. It is the voice inside the wind that resurrects belief whenever flowers bloom against the drought, or sleepers journey through the night to dream beyond all sanity of better days to come. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to open the floor for Q&A to engage the panelists. And people have questions, concerns, issues that they want to bring up. Please just raise your hand and